On the 20th of April, 1991, Banpresto, a company which had established itself previously with games depicting SD or super deformed versions of characters from pre-existing franchises, including but not limited to Kamen Rider, Mobile Suit Gundam, Mazinger Z, and Getter Robo, released a game that would come to establish one of its most successful franchises. This game would come to be known as Super Robot Wars. Incidentally, when this game was first released, it was little more than another one of Banpresto's experiments with the licenses of the aforementioned franchises. The Banpresto games preceding Super Robot Wars were released as a sumo game, a 2D platformer, and a top-down platformer. Much in the same vein of not being the same, Super Robot Wars was a strategy role-playing game. Now, while for many non-Japanese speaking players, their first game was Super Robot Wars Original Generation, I still felt it was worth giving this game a good look at. This game begins with an introduction depicting the monster Gilgun, who I'll be referring to as Gilly from here on out, who was the main villain of Great Mazinger vs. Getter Robo, an animated movie based on the respective robots. The premise here is quite simple. Gilly is attempting to take over the world by brainwashing several residents of the SD world and using them as an army. However, a ragtag team of mechs stand up to face him. From here, the player is prompted to select from a Gundam team, Mazinger team, or Getter team. These options offer a bit of replayability, but it's not much, though I'll get to that in a bit. Additionally, the player is prompted to select a team leader. Once they've selected a team leader, the player is thrown into the first mission. Now, despite being the first entry of the franchise, it plays quite differently from what the franchise has come to be known for. The maps offer secrets to be found, much like in later games, but there's also control towers which offer regeneration and sometimes offer their own items to upgrade your units with. In addition, leaders, and only leaders, can cast spirits which have a range of effects from healing the team, dealing more damage, or in rarer cases, increasing stats. Furthermore, units can convince enemies to join the other side, but unlike later games, this is completely random and unscripted, and it applies for both teams. Other than that, the game is mostly straightforward. The player attempts to defeat the target boss of the stage by mowing through the grunts and by having their own units act on their turn and retaliate on the enemy turn to get stronger and focus the boss once they've gone through, capturing the base and winning the map. However, as soon as the first stage, the game begins to show one of its faults. Despite having multiple units forming a team, it seems counterintuitive to spread these upgrades across your team, instead making it best for the player to funnel all of their upgrades into one single unit, typically the leader. Additionally, since this game also has a leveling system in which defeating enemies grants you experience, that same unit should be charging into enemies in order to get most, if not all, the experience. This is made much more apparent once the player realizes that if a unit's certain stat has gone up high enough, it can act twice per battle, often destroying anything short of some tankier bosses it comes across in 1 or 2 turns of encountering it. But by far the most grating downside of this game is, it's boring. There's no way around that. Truthfully, no matter how you play it, soloing it or as it was originally intended, you're going to find yourself sitting for nearly an hour per mission watching the same actions go down. You move, you encounter an enemy, you hit it until it dies. Rinse and repeat until Gilly himself dies, and you're treated to a credit sequence and a thanks for playing message. The worst part about it is that, as it stands, there's not really difficulty in Super Robot Wars because it doesn't punish you for simply turtling on a tower and then going back to the enemies and going back to the tower. But this is an issue that the series as a whole is going to struggle with, in that the game is mostly not difficult on its own and relies mostly on the player making self-induced challenges to give it a sense of difficulty. On the other hand, I've come to appreciate Super Robot Wars for an entirely different aspect. The crossover element of seeing iconic, albeit old characters interact with one another, which leads me to my next point. The first Super Robot Wars doesn't have any of the characters, only the actual robots themselves, which only sort of have personalities that reflect their pilots. This adds on to the monotony of the game in that you don't really experience much of a story and just hope to see it end. Ultimately, however, the game would prove to be successful and would come to have several sequels, though it would cast off its portability and multiplayer features for quite a few years in exchange for console releases. Though that begs the question, why was Super Robot Wars successful to begin with? Well, to answer that, you'd have to take a look at its other games. While the other Banpresto games explore different genres, somehow I don't believe it's the SRPG element that gave SRW the edge over those games. This is evident in that those other games would have sequels, but over time would become more scarce. No, I think what keeps SRW around would be the lesson it learned from its mistake that the other games wouldn't. The crossover plots that would become more prominent in the sequels, while the other games and their sequels would stay largely the same. In addition, SRW would bring in more licenses and shows to experiment with, drawing in newer and larger crowds. It's through the adaptabilities to more modern audiences and more popular shows, such as Neon Genesis Evangelion, that the series has been able to survive for so long. It kind of reminds me of how I even discovered the series to begin with. Project Cross Zone, a game featuring licenses of Capcom, Sega, and Bandai Namco following in the veins of Namco Cross Capcom and Super Robot Wars, featured characters from the series. Namely, Certain Samurai piqued my interest in the game, I checked it out, and I haven't looked back since. And I would say that's mostly the charm that made SRW so popular to begin with, and is most likely why it's still ongoing to this day. And that's about it. That's the original Super Robot Wars. This is my first time trying this kind of thing, and I really want to do it for the franchise, and I hope this interests whatever audience I currently have. I appreciate people who have been watching my videos because I really appreciate playing these games, even if I say that they're boring. But if you're interested in watching more of these videos, please let me know in the comments, or at least like. Any feedback is appreciated. Thank you for watching.